So I'm hoping that everyone liked that. I'm going to take this off because I don't actually need it. I'm just hearing myself in double. I'm hoping that everyone liked that and that it was able to capture a little bit more of that Lord of the Rings feel. Granted, I was working with the Rings of Power's own footage, so there wasn't much I could do to change, but I tried to not include any of their additions to the story, like the Harfoots or whatever. And I think the trailer now has more of a story, and it tells you what the show theoretically should be about. And it's just a shame that, okay, so I watched that trailer, that this newest trailer on the 14th when it came out, and I originally thought, it doesn't look that bad. It looks pretty. And then I thought about it for 2 seconds more, and I realized that what I liked about it was just that it was shot in New Zealand. My favorite shots were just the panning, like drone shots of New Zealand. And anyone could do that. So it's not an indication that the Amazon show is going to be particularly good. It just means that they had cameras and they were in New Zealand. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the trailer doesn't get me excited the same way that a trailer is supposed to. And that's a shame too, because when was the last time you saw a trailer for something that didn't excite you, that didn't do its job, and then the thing itself was just actually good? Where if you contrast that to the Lord of the Rings trailers, they bring you into the world. And now the show itself is not going to be that. And I tricked myself into thinking that the show would be good based on the trailer that I made, but that's just not going to happen. We have to be realistic. So I'll talk a little bit about the music choice that I used for that, because I think it's impossible to separate Howard Shore from the Lord of the Rings. And yeah, he's working on the Rings of Power, but we'll see how true that actually holds, given that Tom Shippey was supposed to be working on the Rings of Power too, and they fired him. And there are still articles that are posted and haven't been corrected that say that Tom Shippey is still involved with the show, which is a lie. So the trailer opens with the theme of the One Ring, and then it closes with the theme of the One Ring as well. But the reason why I chose to use what is part of the Fellowship score for that middle section, even though the show itself will have nothing to do with the Fellowship or even hobbits, and if you listen to it, it does sound, it is the Concerning Hobbits theme, is that because I think the story of the hobbits is one of sacrifice and one of preservation and a loss of innocence. And they're protecting the Shire, a place that doesn't even know it needs to be protected. And while that won't be the case in the actual Second Age, because the hobbits aren't supposed to be there, the story of the Second Age is still that same story, one of sacrifice and one of preserving something and preserving its purity, except that in the Second Age, all of Middle-earth is the Shire at that point because it hasn't been completely taken over yet. It hasn't fallen into decay yet. Whereas once we get to the Third Age, things have gone so far downhill that the Shire is the only little pocket really of the world besides Imladris, Rivendell, and some of the elven cities. Everything else has fallen so far. So I thought that the inclusion of the Concerning Hobbits theme in the form of the Fellowship theme helped to, one, draw people in because it's something that we recognize, and also pay homage to the fact that, yes, we like hobbits, like Amazon wanted to do, but I'm just thinking I have a little bit more subtlety with it. But it also does help tell the story. Kleenex is asking, is Weta doing the props? I know that Weta is involved in technically some capacity, but Amazon is being really quiet about what it is that they're actually doing with the show. They barely even told us what the plot is. So I know that some elements of Weta, the name Weta, are involved in the show. I don't know if they specifically are doing the props because Weta has multiple different departments. It might be more of a marketing thing than it is anything else. Let's see. Marlene Riddle says, I heard that John Howe is on the crew too, but I don't see much of his influence in the costumes either, unless he only did the orc designs. Yeah, I would agree. I'm not sure how much input any of the original members of Peter Jackson's team actually had. It seems like they had elements of some things, because the Elven cities, they look nice. And so does what I assume is going to be Numenor as well. It looks nice. And then you look at the costumes, and they look far too clean. They look like costumes rather than clothes. Whereas in Peter Jackson's films, they were obviously very meticulous about including things that no one would ever see. Um, with the Amazon show, you look at these promo pictures, and not only is the period wrong, but the costumes themselves just look like they're made out of the wrong materials. They don't look real to me. And now someone will say, "Oh well, Kramer, it's fantasy. It's not real. Do you think it's real?" And the point of the Lord of the Rings is that it is a fairy story on the brink of history, so it can't look fake like that, or it doesn't work. It doesn't transport you to a secondary world if the show is constantly reminding you that you're watching a TV show. Costumes look like cosplay. I'd agree. I'd say that when I look at the costumes in their original forms, it looks like I'm watching a Saturday Night Live sketch of The Lord of the Rings, not an actual show called The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. But we can't change that, sadly. If you'll notice in the trailer, let me know if you picked up on this, but I think that in addition to the music, that the actual shots of the Rings of Power footage, when blended with Peter Jackson's footage, it looks more natural that way. And if you pick up on that too, and you watch the original trailer and you're like, the original trailer looks more fake, whereas the trailer that I did seems to capture a little bit more of that ethereal glow, that Middle Earth haze. At least that's what I tried to do. It's because I recolor graded all of the Rings of Power footage. I put a film grain on it, and I changed the tint. I redid the colors so that it looks more like Lord of the Rings. I think the trailer has gotten a lot of better feedback, and I thought it was a better trailer overall. But yeah, I wasn't excited for it either. It really boils down to plot, dialogue, etc. Yeah, I would agree. I think it looks pretty, but that's to be expected because it's 2022, and it's almost. I'm not going to say that work didn't go into it, and I'm not going to say that it isn't artistry that they were able to create those beautiful CG backdrops. But it's not an indication that the show will be good, and it's honestly not even necessarily that impressive because every show is doing that now. Iruvador says, I'm curious to see how they're going to include the references to the First Age, given how limited their rights are to the books. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. I wish they had just been more focused and told the story of the forging of the Rings of Power, which is what the trailer that I created would have been the trailer for. I don't know how they're going to include all that with all of the time jumps. It's either going to just be barely a snippet, or they're going to compress everything so much that the War of Wrath and the Second War against Sauron happened at the same time or something. Kleenex again says, to be fair, the costumes look like in The Hobbit much less realistic and fakey. I agree, and that's because Peter Jackson, I think, was messing around with filming in 48 frames per second rather than in 24 frames per second, like he did with Lord of the Rings, and the colors are a lot more saturated, so it looks a little more edited. Wheel of Time, also Amazon, had the exact same problem with their costumes and set. I didn't watch the Wheel of Time, and I don't plan to, because I've just heard terrible things about it, and I don't feel like wasting my time. But I would agree, from the pictures and footage of it that I've seen, they look equally not great. Ryan Stetson says, I feel like they don't want to talk a lot about the plot so they can pull in watchers who watched Game of Thrones but aren't super into fantasy as a whole. Correct. And I said this in my defense of Tolkien, defense of Lord of the Rings video, is that the reason why they are holding back information is because if you can stay the flood of backlash for as long as possible and keep it down to a trickle of just a couple people realize that it's going to be bad here, and just a couple people get upset here, then no movement can form to boycott the show. And the resistance is a lot less powerful than if they just said, hey, this is what we're doing, and then everyone said, no, I hate that. Instead, it's just these little pocket groups of people. So they're doing that exactly for that purpose. Last Unicorn, nice name. They don't have a blanket right to other books, but they can, with approval by the estate, use whatever they need from any book on a case-by-case basis. If that's true, then that's good to know. Marlene again says Peter Jackson was really into color grading, and I think it set the tone for the fantasy element very well. I agree, as opposed to the realistic props and costumes, which Jackson stressed that must feel medieval and lived in, and they really nailed it. My favorite little tinfoil hat conspiracy, which is obviously just a joke, is that Peter Jackson actually just took a camera crew into Middle Earth and just filmed like a living history documentary of the actual people that lived there. And the greatest conspiracy of all time is that they just happened to hire a bunch of actors and film a bunch of fake footage of them filming the movies to pretend that they didn't actually travel to Middle Earth in order to protect it. By the way, that video still stands strong. I hope the show will be at least all right, but I don't think anyone could ever put a stop to Peter Jackson films for me anyways. I agree. I'm not going to watch The Rings of Power if when it comes out it is called good by critics that I actually trust, not people that have been paid to say that it's good, then maybe I'll give it a watch. But for now, I don't think it's going to be good. And that doesn't mean that it's not worth time talking about, because the goal here is obviously not to convince the fans of Lord of the Rings that The Rings of Power is going to be good. Because if they were trying to do that, then they wouldn't be attacking us for the justifiable criticisms we have of the show. The goal with The Rings of Power is to drown out the voices of the fans with a new fan base, a consumer-based fan base that doesn't know anything about Lord of the Rings, but just wants to watch the new flashy fantasy TV show that Amazon has to offer. And it has worked in the past. We can just look at Star Wars. The goal is to convince that third party. The party that doesn't know anything. Because when you don't know anything, you can be convinced of anything. But the reason I created the trailer was to remind everyone that no matter how pretty the Rings of Power trailers look, they could have been, they had no reason to fail, right? They have no right to fail this. Just as the Peter Jackson films are a masterpiece, they had no right to be as good as they were, and yet they were, because the team that worked on them was that dedicated. The Rings of Power has everything setting it up for success. It has every right to be the greatest show in the last decade, if not more. And it's just not going to be that, because they couldn't do it. And I want my fan trailer to remind people of that. And never forget what Amazon took from you and what can now not be made because Amazon has the rights to it. What if superfans say it's the best show ever? Well, will you watch it then? No. No, I won't. I thought those videos were funny, though. I am super proud of Tolkien fans for standing firm on this, that the new trailers looked better, but not really good, but still not badly ratioed, shows that we aren't fools. Yes, we are not fools. At least I hope not. Don't be fooled by Amazon. Saruman and Sauron, the Deceiver, and Wormtongue all had honeyed words, and a person without strong guidance or willpower could be swayed by them. But we are not that. Don't listen to Amazon. Don't listen to their placations for oh my gosh, we love Tolkien. We love the source material. We promise to be faithful. Their actions don't match their words. And we should be judging them by what it is that they do, not what it is that they tell us. I still haven't forgiven Peter Jackson for cutting Tom Bombadil out of the story. That's fair. Tom Bombadil was a really cool character. I understand narratively why it didn't quite fit in the screen adaptation, but I mean, I guess we could get into that if we want. But I understand where you're coming from, but I see both sides. That was from Bonnie115. Ruvador says, the more that has come out about it, the more I'm glad they didn't do the Silmarillion instead. Well, they kind of are doing like kind of a weird version of the Silmarillion, right? Because they kind of have the rights to the appendices, and they're just making it up. Now, I think that might have been on purpose, because if they say, oh, all we had to work on was the appendices, then now they can justify having to add in all of this extra stuff. And if you'll notice in the trailer, I didn't include any of the stuff that they added. So I hope that helped add to the feel. There were other cuts of it that I had that did have a Rondir in it, but I decided that it didn't quite fit. Not that he's inherently wrong for existing, but the trailer should be about the Rings of Power, and he's just not relevant as far as I can tell. Totally fair. Bonnie says, I understand it, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. Totally fair, guy. Totally fair. I think the Star Wars comparison is interesting because critically, episode 1 and 3 were poorly received, but then years later, there was a renaissance of prequel supporters that grew up with them. True. And then, in addition to that, a renaissance of people who went, you know what, in comparison to this Disney sequels, the prequels really weren't that bad. That doesn't mean that the prequels were good. It just means they weren't as bad as the sequels. Um, So yeah, and of course we noticed that both The Last Jedi has the phrase "Let the past die, kill it if you have to," and then this new Rings of Power trailer says the past is dead. You either move forward or die with it. So it's very clear what they're doing. And let us not forget that in The Witcher season 2, I think it was maybe episode 3 or 4. The writers of the show used the Askir as a mouthpiece to berate the audience who had criticisms of season 1, literally telling them things like, you know, you're stupid. If you're so great, why don't you just write the show yourself? Why can't you just be grateful for what we're giving you? They make it very clear how they feel about us. Let's see. Ryan says, I don't think episode 7-9 will have that, and I think this is going to fall in the same category for Lord of the Rings. I'm not following the exact thread of comments here, so I'm sure that's in reference to Star Wars. Nathan says, do you think they will give Elrond's backstory to Galadriel and make him irrelevant? The original trailer seems to suggest that. I can guess all I want, but it doesn't really matter because Amazon has made it their prerogative not to tell us what their intentions are. It seems like I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, Elrond also saw right through Sauron and knew exactly what he was from the very first moment. And it was, I'm blanking on the name. It was a different character that Galadriel felt like she had to convince, and there were other characters that Galadriel felt that she had to convince. But she wasn't the sole person that saw through Sauron. It was mostly Celebrimbor, who was tricked into forging the rings, who wasn't even in the trailer. So I don't know what they're going to do with Elrond. I get that with Star Wars. The prequels have more and more depth. The more you look past the awful dialogue, the deeper you look into the sequels, the shallower it feels. It's true. Please don't remind me of The Witcher. What a waste. I feel you. I really do. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to watch the third season either. It's better. What we'll talk about what we need to do in order to go forward, because we could not watch Amazon, and we could not watch The Witcher, but they're going to continue making them anyway because their whole point is that they don't need us. They don't need the original fans because they can create new shiny ones that like to watch the attractive screen people. So what we need to do is relentlessly remind everybody else what true good fantasy art is. That's what we need to do. And that means that if you are a writer and you're a member of my community, let this fuel you. Write a new book. Write a new thing that will become popular, and remind people always that what this cookie cutter, machine based, stamped out pattern making of fantasy shows is nothing compared to what an actual creative mind is capable of achieving. That's what it is that we need to do. We need to create the next Tolkien of our generation. I didn't watch the second season of The Witcher. Was it that bad? First episode was actually really good. Of course, I'm comparing it to the episodes of season 1. The first episode made me really excited, and then everything went downhill from there. How large is the Tolkien fan base compared to Amazon's target market of wokeists? My impression is that fantasy fans have become very woke over the past few years. Look at Wizards of the Coast. I can't quantify it because I genuinely don't know. Now, I would take it as an indication that when you look at the comment sections and the like to dislike ratio of Amazon's own trailers, and you look at posts on Instagram about it, that a lot of those are on the side of Tolkien and not on the side of Amazon. But then you go to places like Reddit, and they're literally banning people that have anything negative to say about the trailers. So you're not even allowed to have a negative opinion of it. That is how they are creating the illusion that they are the majority. They might be. I don't think that they are. But again, the goal here is not the small minority of people that actually have an agenda, or the slightly larger but still minority group of people that love Tolkien and his work and love the Peter Jackson films. The main demographic that is being targeted is the people that are not on either side and don't know anything and will consume anything, that is the largest demographic, and those are the people that we have to reach. The War of the Rohirrim gives me hope for good Lord of the Rings content in the next few years. That was from Nathan. Thanks, Nathan. And I agree. I'm very excited for the War for the Rohirrim. Of course, we have to wait to see what it is that they actually do, but they've got a lot of team members from the original Peter Jackson's trilogy, which gives me heart. And if there was any group of people that I trust to still understand the core heart and the meaning of the Lord of the Rings, which is well, I'm not going to ascribe my sole interpretation, but I think a big part of it, of course, is self-sacrifice and preservation of that which is pure, and doing what needs to be done and not wallowing in grief or pitying yourself, and moving forward. They're the group of people that I trust to do that the most at the moment in our current world society is actually the Japanese, because if you watch a lot of animes, they share a lot of those same core values of friendship and sacrifice and support and purity. So and just as a virtue of being the visual medium of anime, which is hand drawn, they are required to understand how to boil down very complex concepts into easily understandable visual representations. So I think that they're going to do a good job. Amanda says, I'm working on so many ideas, but I will try to get something out soon. But one idea in particular was inspired by Tolkien, and it started because I wanted an Asian version. Very good. Very good. Wish you the best of luck with that. Get working. We got some more talks about Tom Bombadil here. I think that Reddit is just a gathering place for woke people. I posted there once because I wanted to share something from my culture, but their constant attacks on Narnian fandom pushed me away. That's a shame, but yeah. Reddit is a blight. It's basically three young men who must find genie lamps before the this is the book idea from Amanda. It's basically three young men who must find genie lamps before the enemy does, and are helped by a secret society of women sworn to protect the lamps. Yeah. Lamps are cool. Yeah, excited to see what you come up with. More Tom Bombadil talk. Reddit is very much Reddit is very much distilled wokeness. Pretty much only go there for their heraldry sub anymore. Yeah, there's some good stuff on Reddit, but a lot of the fantasy subreddits are openly hostile to anyone who would criticize the Lord of the Rings, which is a shame. My favorite is when people criticize us for criticizing the Rings of Power and say, well, how can you say that it's going to be bad if you haven't watched it yet? And by commenting that, they clearly haven't watched the video that they're commenting on, because at least my video was not about criticizing the Rings of Power. It was about criticizing Amazon's tactics and protecting the fans against it. And it really had very little to do with the show. I make the point in the beginning of the video that the show is mostly irrelevant to begin with. But people don't want us to criticize things, and their solution to that is to criticize us for criticizing things, which I think is ironic. Reddit is a cesspit of wokeism. Years ago, I disliked anime, but now I like it because most modern movies and shows are really bad, so I opened myself up to anime. There's a lot of good animes out there. Amanda says she likes the trailer. Thanks so much. I was proud of it. It took me 9 hours to do, which might sound like a long time. And it was for about 2 minutes worth of footage. And now I didn't have to shoot all of it myself. It would have obviously taken a lot longer. So I am reaping the benefits of Howard Shore and of Peter Jackson and of the teams of the Rings of Power, because I didn't create anything. I just recontextualized something that was poor into something that was good. At least that's how I view it. So I watched the trailer on the 14th. I didn't really like it. I didn't really feel anything for it. And then the next day I was like, you know what? I bet I can make this better. And then I just sat down and I did. And it took me 9 hours. And while you might think, yeah, Kramer, that's a long time to spend, isn't it odd that they've been working on this? They've had the rights for the show since 2017, and they've been working on it for years, and they've had the footage for this long. And I, a single person with zero budget, in 9 hours created a trailer of lower resolution quality than theirs, surely. But I created a trailer that I think tells the story that they're trying to tell better than they were able to. So we'll just take that into account. I was a flagrant weeb as a teen, then pretty much abandoned anime altogether, and now pretty much go for the things I used to enjoy about general fantasy. It's from Iruvador again. I love the Tom Bombadil discussion, but I'm not going to read it out loud. That's on how long before they take your trailer down. Well, they didn't take my Lord of the Rings video down, my Defense of Tolkien. They haven't taken that one down yet. They are copyrighted, of course. And I accept that. I didn't create the footage that I was using. I just think it's ironic that Amazon violates the source material that they own the copyrights to, and they don't get in trouble. But I use source material arguably better than they do, and I get copyrighted for it. But I accept it. That's the law. I don't think they'll take it down unless it gets huge traction and is viewed as a threat. Then maybe they'll throttle it. But plenty of other fans have made fan trailers and cuts of stuff too. Those are still up. So I'm hoping it stays up. Kleenex, that was from Bojangle Baggins. Thank you, Bojangle. Kleenex, sorry. Clean Eye XX. I'm not sure, honestly. You can go ahead and type how to pronounce your name. By the way, I love how you and Clever from Skilltree have become friends, and I hope to see some awesome collaborations at some point. So, funny story. Today's video was actually supposed to be a talk back with me and Kit and Maddie from Skilltree about our experience at Reckoning. And then I decided that posting this Rings of Power trailer was more important. Not to say that me being with friends and talking about Reckoning, the LARP, isn't important, but just it's prevalent. It's a hot topic right now. And because people will be seeing the new Rings of Power trailer, I want them directly reminded what it could have been, so that they will see it, and then they will be sad, and then they will be angry. So yes, there is content coming with me and Kit and Maddie. There will be a video on my channel, and there will be a video on their channel as well. Just like the wipes, lol, Kleenex. Okay, Kleenex it is then. The Tom Bombadil talk. I'm pleased that your trailer features the Ringverse. It is one of the best, most riveting poems ever written, in my opinion. Last Unicorn. Thank you. Yes, it's true. It's almost as if Tolkien wrote those books and he knew best how to word the story. And we don't need the new dialogue written by the Rings of Power. Tolkien's words are enough. Well, considering your trailer is getting better reviews, it could be seen as a threat. I hope so. I hope so. And my biggest fear is not that it gets taken down. My biggest fear is that Amazon copies it and then uses it as their own thing in order to promote their show. When, make no mistake, my creation of this trailer was not in admiration for Amazon or not in anticipation of their show. It is a protest. It is a resistance. Not anything complicated or a representation of other real world. Sorry, there's two comments here. It was meant as a link with his kids to his stories, not anything complicated or representation of other real world context. That's referring to Tolkien's purpose with writing Lord of the Rings. It changes based on the letters that you read, but more or less, yes, The Hobbit was originally written as a story for his kids, and only later did he realize that it sort of worked into his vision, which he never completed, of an overarching history for his home country of England. Marlene Riddle says, yes, your trailer was much more to the point and actually hits the title Rings of Power far better than the Amazon one did. Love to hear it. Kleenex says, are you generally a fan of high or low fantasy? I feel like high fantasy can get too overwhelming and convoluted. For me, sometimes that's why I love Lord of the Rings so much, but it still has a place, definitely. Well, it depends, because Lord of the Rings is technically a high fantasy. But compared to other high fantasies that I know, I personally consider Lord of the Rings to be lower fantasy because it's more grounded. So my answer is that I prefer fantasy stories that are grounded in a sense of authenticity, in a sense of realism. It doesn't matter to me how much magic there is. It doesn't matter how awesome the creatures are. It matters to me that there is a level of realness, because that is what I can connect with. Juggulator Zero says, how can one man with a passion and a YouTube channel be so on point, but a multi-million-dollar company get it oh so wrong? Bravo. Thank you, my friend. I don't know. It's a shame, but this is the capacity to which I am able to say something in the sphere. I could have started other channels and talked about things. I could relentlessly and endlessly just criticize every trailer that comes out. But there are plenty of people that do that, and they're good at it in their own right, whether or not you think it's necessary. But I'm an actor myself, and I like good stories. I want to tell good stories. So the reason why I care so much about this and why I'm so passionate about it is because if they ruin all the stories, then there's nothing left for me to do as my job. Bonnie says, low or high, I like good stories told well. Facts. Middle fantasy from Shaggy Shaggy-O. Middle fantasy, Middle Earth, middle fantasy. It's good. It seems like we're in agreement. We like middle fantasy. We like grounded fantasy. Nathan, thanks for joining us. I'll probably close out soon too, so get your questions in if you have any left right here, and I'll probably do this again at some point because it seems to have gone quite well. But I do have to get going as well soon. Planning on recreating your Ranger's garb to immerse myself in the realism of these essentially medievalized fantasy worlds. You can send me pictures on Instagram. I'd love to see what you come up with, Kleenex. It's Living Anachronism Official on Instagram. Amanda says, a fair point. No good stories, no work. Nathan says before he leaves, just note that if ever there was a large-scale fan project to make a first or second age show movie, I am donating. If it is The Children of Hurin, I ruin myself to help. It is the best story. Yeah, and I mean, and that is what it's going to take in order to fight these oligarchical monopolies like Amazon and Netflix. It's going to take fan-funded, crowd-funded, blood, sweat, and tears in order for us to create something worth watching. What is the old saying? A camel is a horse designed by a committee, from Bonnie. I haven't heard that before. That's funny. See you, Nemanova. Thank you. I'm also on my way out. Will you be doing reviews, discussions on the show once it comes out from Bojangle Baggins? No, because I won't be watching the show, and you shouldn't either. It's not worth it to review it. I'd rather focus on other things that are worth reviewing. I'd rather just talk about Peter Jackson's trilogy. I'd rather talk about Tolkien's own books than I think it is beneficial to just watch the Rings of Power simply so that I can get upset about it. I would help if it was Baron and Luthien from Amanda. Yeah. For all those who like Middle Earth, for all those who like middle fantasy, aka ground fantasy with high fantasy elements, would love to have more people introduced to wuxia, although the language barrier may be a turnoff. I haven't heard of that. I'll check that out. Amanda says, I just have to say, I like your name. It has a nice ring to it. That was to at Bojangles, not Bojangle Baggins, not me. And I agree. It's got a good ring. If you were in control of making any adaptation based on Middle Earth, what would you adapt? From Alexander Robertson. I don't think that I qualify to be in charge of either the writing or the directing of an adaptation for Lord of the Rings. I am passionate about it. I know what I like, and I think I have a decent finger on what it is that fans of the books and the movies respectively like, but I don't think that I am the person to do that necessarily, because there are people that are far more knowledgeable about Tolkien's lore than I am. So that's my answer to that. Yes, tempted to watch it, but do not plan on it. Yes, don't. If people that you trust come out and say that it's good, trust but verify, because they still could have been bought, then maybe take the time to watch it. I still wouldn't pay Amazon to watch it. Not telling you to do anything illegal. I'm just saying. Looking into more fantasy, have found Iron Tower trilogy, but would like more. And I'll throw in there, if people haven't read it, though, the name is a little bit more prevalent. If you haven't read the Ranger's Apprentice series by John Flanagan, definitely do that. I read that book series, I think 7 or 8 times fully through, 11 books worth when I was in high school. I would read it all the way through and then immediately start again. And if they had planned on making an adaptation of Ranger's Apprentice back when I was in high school, I was planning on auditioning for Will Treaty, but that never ended up happening. I always thought an interesting thread to pull would be the fate of the Blue Wizards from Bonnie. Yeah, I mean, there's tons of stories. They could have done the war further in the north with in Dale. That was happening at the same time as the War for the Ring in Gondor. That would have been really interesting. And when I do Lord of the Rings reenactment, I like to think of my character as a barding, as someone from Dale. So that would have been really interesting to get to see on screen, but we're not going to get that, I guess. Clinic says, I think I'll watch it with my little brother. We enjoy spending a bit of quality time, but essentially on a moral level, I agree it's better not to watch it. You should just watch the Peter Jackson trilogy with him instead. That will never get old. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Do what you want. But I think you'd have a good time just watching the Peter Jackson trilogy, even if you've already seen it. Is Ranger's Apprentice good for adults as well? I've heard mixed reviews. You know what? Now that I think about it, I actually haven't read it in a couple of years, so I might be remembering it with sort of a fog of nostalgia from when I did read it. I'd say it holds up. It's certainly not got the same eloquent prose that, or poetry for that matter, that the Lord of the Rings would have in Tolkien's work. But I think it is still relatable, and I think it is still a good story. So, read the first book and see what you think. If you don't like it, you can always put it down. Yes, more recommendations for Ranger's Apprentice in the chat. Good suggestion. We probably will as well. Good. Yes. We always watch the Peter Jackson trilogy. Extended version, and then watch all of the appendices of the making ofs and everything. I cry when I watch those, and I think about how much work went into that. So, this will be a fun question for the chat, and then I think I got to go. What was your first introduction to Lord of the Rings in general? Was it just the books, especially if you are of the older generations, or was it the Peter Jackson films? And I'll open by sharing my story. Is that I think in the early 2000s, my first introduction to the concept of Lord of the Rings was not the books or Peter Jackson's films. My first experience with the Lord of the Rings was actually the Ralph Bakshi cartoon, which is dated now at this point, but I think still serves its purpose, and I don't think it's bad by any means. And I think it'll arguably be more faithful to Tolkien's work than the Amazon show will. But that was my first introduction, and then I thought it was like a standalone thing, and it always confused me that it ends after the Battle of the Hornburg and then doesn't conclude with anything. And I was just like, okay, that was an interesting movie, I guess, because I was a kid and I didn't know. And then I was introduced to, hey, actually, it's a live action movie, and then I watched The Fellowship a bunch of times before I saw either of the other two movies, because when I was younger, The Mines of Moria scared me. So I closed my eyes during that bit, and then I just didn't understand it enough. I was too small to understand why the story mattered, as it were. Thank you, Samwise Gamgee. And then the resurgence. I mean, I always enjoyed Lord of the Rings. Once, as I got a little bit older, then I watched all the movies, and then I read The Hobbit, and then I read The Lord of the Rings. I always enjoyed it, but I didn't really start passionately appreciating it for the genius that it is until after I watched the final season of Game of Thrones, and I realized, oh, not anyone can just create a fantasy masterpiece. It is the exception to the rule that this exists, and it's stunning that it exists, and I appreciated it so much more because of that. And that is when I really started, not that I hadn't dived into the Lord of the Rings before, but that is when that passion was reawakened in me, shall we say, after many years of college. Ruvador says, my intro was actually back in 2004 as a kid, and seeing the Noble Collection in Sky Mall magazine on a plane trip, I thought it looked cool, and my mom pointed me to The Hobbit. Marlene says, I was introduced from the movies, but only the Ent scene with Merry and Pippin. That convinced me to read the book, my preferred medium, and then I returned back to the movies after. I love this. There's so many awesome comments here. Saw the cartoons first. The Hobbit cartoon, I forget the name of the company that did it. It has so much soul to it. I love the songs, like The Greatest Adventure and The Road Goes Ever On. Those are beautiful songs. I saw the cartoons first. Yep, I found a pocket version of the Hobbit book as a kid, and dwarves forever became my favorite fantasy race. Dwarves are seriously underrated. It ended up being how I met my wife. That's awesome. I think I watched the first movie with eight or so when I was sick, and I was so hooked. I always thought reading the books was necessary, but the unofficial audiobook is so awesome. That was from Kleenex. Yeah, I've been listening to Andy Serkis read me The Lord of the Rings. I started when I was driving back across the country from Utah, and it kept me occupied the whole time. It's just so cool to listen to him read The Lord of the Rings to me. My dad is the collector's edition, though Shaggy-O says, though, I didn't know what Lord of the Rings was till the Peter Jackson movies. Yeah, a lot of people were introduced through those movies, which is the argument that people are going to make about the Rings of Power show, that, oh, maybe it will just bring new fans in. But the Peter Jackson movies could also do that, which makes the Rings of Power, makes that reason for the Rings of Power existing redundant, unless they can do what Peter Jackson did better, which by the footage that they've shown, they obviously can't, so why does it exist? Ryan Stetson says, my first experience was seeing The Hobbit on a bookshelf, then seeing the animated movie on the shelf next to it and grabbing that from the library instead. Marlene says, that's what I always knew about Tolkien, being a mega Narnia fan from childhood. Yep. C.S. Lewis, right? But didn't read the Lord of the Rings till later. Sorry, I forget the name of who said this, but the end scene, right, in the Two Towers, that conversation between Merry and Pippin, which of course happens very differently in the book, but narratively they needed, I guess, to create a bigger climax towards the end of the Two Towers, where Pippin is essentially saying, right, he just says, Treebeard's right. We don't belong here. The world's too big for us. We've got the Shire. And I would employ people not to make that same mistake in the case of the Rings of Power. It is not enough to just not watch the show. We have to be very, not aggressive. You know, we have to have some tact here. We don't have the benefits of a positive press to write glowing things about us. So we have to have an optics check, but we do have to share our love for the Lord of the Rings with people in a way that will show them what the Lord of the Rings is actually supposed to be about, not some commercialized CGI cookie cutter creation. We can't just retreat into the books and the Peter Jackson movies and go, well, at least I have this. Because eventually they will come for that. It is a machine that does not stop. The fires of Isengard will spread, and the forests of Buckland will burn. There won't be a Shire. So I think I'm going to close with that. But let's not make the mistake of just retreating into the books and thinking that those pages will protect us, because they will eventually come for those. They've already reprinted the original books with the Amazon covers. How can they come for the books? They're just made socially unacceptable to read and culturally irrelevant, and they are replaced with something new. They can do the same thing to the Peter Jackson movies. And the reason that they can do that is because they are saying that this is the prequel to the story of the Lord of the Rings, but they're not attempting to be canon with Peter Jackson's trilogy, while at the same time saying, oh, well, we cast some people to be like they were in the Peter Jackson's films, so at the very least they're confused. But if they're not attempting to be canon with Peter Jackson's trilogy, and they're still saying that it's a prequel to the Lord of the Rings, then what is it a prequel to? It's because they're going to try to reboot the Lord of the Rings eventually. That is how they're eventually going to erase it. So don't get comfortable. This isn't going to just end. It's not going to just go away. But I'm going to go ahead and close there. Thanks to everyone who stayed with me. This was a very successful first live stream, I'd say. It went on a lot longer than I even hoped that it would. So that's not a bad thing. It's just saying I didn't think there'd be that many comments. So thanks for joining me. And go ahead and watch the trailer again. Share it with people. Remind people what this could have been and will never be. Weep for that. And I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, good luck on your adventures.